Good morning. Let people finish up their conversations before we begin today. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, visiting family and friends, got to eat a little bit. I know we did. On Thursday, we were with my sister and her family. Then on Friday, we ate again with Sherry and her folks. And on Saturday, we were back again with my sister and her side, eating with them. So it's been a very eating weekend. So, yeah. Sherry bowled too. She's only saying that because she won. So, but it was good to be with family and friends, and it really gets us to thinking, at least me, that, that's how we are every Sunday. We're so thankful for what God has given us and all the blessings we have. Not just the physical things, but what we look forward to when we get to stand before Him. And it was a great weekend, and I hope your weekend was just as good as what ours was. Last time I was up here, I probably spoke a year and a half ago. I went through Jonah and I went through Nahum. I'm going to attempt to go through Daniel. And when I thought, hey, Daniel's an easy book, what do you think of when you hear somebody's going to go through the book of Daniel? Lion's den and the fiery furnace. When I started flipping through the pages and studying a little bit more, I was like, oops, what am I doing? Oops, this is a little more in depth to what it is than I thought. And then I told Ted July, I'm going to be speaking on Daniel, and his eyes opened up a little bit. He says, you sure? I said, yeah. Well, I'll get you some commentaries if you want some help on this, and it definitely paid off. So talked to him a little bit. I talked to Terry once, and Terry gave him a little input because we only talked for a little bit, but it was worthwhile. And Daniel is a whole bunch more than the lion's den and the fiery furnace, and it starts off a little bit slow, but as we get into it, I think you'll see, and I hope you can appreciate a little bit more of the book of Daniel if you haven't already been through it in a little bit. Is there any announcements or anything that we need to pray for this morning? Will you bow with me, please? Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this day that you've seen fit to give us. We thank you for this time as your children we gather together, that we can study your word, keep our ears and hearts open to the words that are before us, that we can study it and become better servants of thee. Father, as we go through the book of Daniel, Father, be with me that I can say something that will open the hearts and somebody can gather some information that they can help themselves. And Father, as we go through this throughout the next up and coming weeks, let us keep our ears focused on you and the words that you have to say to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Daniel chapter 1. Daniel's kind of broken out into a couple of different sections, if you will. Chapters 1 through 6 are basically contain stories of faith, and then 7 through 12 through the end of the book are comprised of prophecy. And it's when we get to chapters 7 through 12 is really where you don't think about the lion's den and the fiery furnace anymore. That's where it really opens up our eyes. Daniel takes place in Babylon, is the primary location, which today is it's the Euphrates River area, which is basically Iraq. So if you want to look at it in present day, to think of where this story is taking place, it's Iraq area, which when I spoke before about, I'm only going to tie in Jonah and Nineveh and Nahum for a little bit, but that was all in that general area, in the Iraqi area. And when we meet Daniel and his friends, we first see them, they're captive. They're prisoners. And we see that quite often in the Bible, that God's people have been taken captive for whatever reason. And usually the whatever reason is, they disobeyed God and God's teaching them a lesson. So is the case here when we see them in the book of Daniel. And God's people have been uprooted. They've been taken from the promised land, and they've been taken into the Babylonian captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. And the Judean people, God's people, shouldn't be surprised that they've been taken into captivity, because it's been pointed out many times throughout the Bible that, hey, this is going to happen to you if you do this or that. And in Deuteronomy chapter 28, there's a couple of points I'd like to make there. Let's start at Deuteronomy 28:15. I want to bounce around and skip sections of it. 28:15. But it shall come about, if you will not obey the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes with which I charge you today, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. If we read on through 16 on down, it's our curse you shall be in the city, and curse you shall be in the country, and it keeps going on till later in the chapter. Same chapter, verse 32. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, while your eyes shall look on and yearn for them continually, but there shall be nothing you can do. He keeps going on, telling them what's going to happen. Verse 36, the Lord will bring you and your king, whom you shall set over you, to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone. He's warning them, if you do this, if you don't serve me, if you don't follow my commands, these things are going to happen to you. Same chapter, starting at verse 49. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth as the eagle swoops down, a nation whose language you shall not understand, a nation of fierce countenance who shall have no respect for the old, nor show favor to the young. Moreover, it should eat the offspring of your herd and the produce of your ground until you are destroyed, who also leaves you no grain, new wine, or oil, nor increase of your herd, or the young of your flock, until they have caused you to perish. And it shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls, in which you trusted, to come down throughout your land. And it shall besiege you in all your towns throughout your land, which the Lord has given you. I think God's people have been duly warned of what's going to happen if, going back to verse 13, they don't obey the Lord in his commandments. This all sounds negative and doom and gloom. Backing up to verse 1 and verse 2 of the same chapter. Now it shall be, if you will diligently obey the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth, and all the blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, and you will obey the Lord your God. They've been given two choices. You obey me, you get this. You disobey me, you get that. And we've seen it throughout many times in the Bible where they've disobeyed God, they've gotten that. They're getting their due diligence of what they've earned, what they've deserved. And God has warned them over and over again. So being captive, being taken out of their homeland shouldn't be a surprise to them here in the book of Daniel in chapter 1, where, going back to the history, it says, if you don't obey me, you will become captives. You will see what is going to happen to you. But, like I said, starting in verse 1, it shows of his promises for obedience. But why would God do this to his people? What would cause God to have his people to be taken into captivity?
Sin. Rebellion.
Rebellion of the people? Sin? Absolutely. I mean, God is a loving and just God, but he can be provoked to anger. But what doesn't he like? He doesn't like sin. And when sin comes about, when people disobey him, he does things. God was provoked by his people because they disobeyed him. You know, what I read in Deuteronomy shows that you folks have been duly warned. What are some of the things that they did? I'd like to read 2 Kings chapter 21. It's verses 1 through 18. I'm not going to read the whole section. I'm just going to read verses 1 through 6. Manasseh, this is Hezekiah's son, was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hephzibah. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord disposed before the sons of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and he erected altars for Baal and made Asherah as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem I will put my name. He built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. And he made his sons pass through the fire, practiced witchcraft, and used divination, and dealt with mediums and spirits, and he did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. I'm not going to forgive the kid because he was 12 years old. But the people put him in as king. They wanted him as their king. And this king over them did these evil things. He started doing things, putting things in the temple that shouldn't have been there. He was doing things that his father had taken down and the people didn't do. He's disobeying God. So this is one of the things that's provoking God. Not just what the king did, but it stated in, I believe it was verse 1 or 2, that the people made him their king. Another king I'd like to talk about is in Jeremiah chapter 36. Jehoiakim. Starting Jeremiah 36, starting with verse 23. I'm not going to start at verse 23, I'm sorry. 23 through 31 gives the bulk of the story. I'm going to start in verse 29. And concerning Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, you shall say, Thus says the Lord, You have burned the scroll, saying, Why have you written on it that the king of Babylon shall certainly come and destroy this land and make man and beast to cease from it? Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim, king of Judah, He shall have no one sit on the throne of David, and his dead body shall be cast out to the heat of the day and the frost of the night. And I shall also punish him and his descendants and his servants for their iniquities, and I shall bring on them and the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the men of Judea all the calamity that I have declared to them, but they did not listen. Then Jeremiah took another scroll and gave it to Baruch, the son of Neriah, the scribe, and he wrote on it at the dictation of Jeremiah all the words of the book of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, had burned in the fire, and many similar words were added to them. The first part that I skipped over was the burning of the scrolls that Jehoiakim did. This is another king that was doing things that God was displeased with. The people were following him and not obeying God. This is provoking God, and this is another reason that God had his people taken into captivity. So it's for us to learn present day. Yes, we don't have a king over us, but we got to pay attention to who we have in our political office. And I'm not trying to make this a political thing whatsoever. It's we need, as Christians, to do our due diligence in the people that are running our country, our cities, and our towns. We need to pay attention to what they believe and the practices that they want to institute into our nation and our cities. Is it something that we can live with? Is it something that I believe in? Because we have a responsibility to do what we can to help improve our neighborhoods, our cities, and that. And by just randomly or not paying attention to who we vote in, that could be very, very bad and very, very dangerous. We need to pay attention to it. Just like these folks are electing certain kings, we're electing certain officials. We're voting for that. We need to make sure we're paying attention to who we're voting to. Like I said, this is not a political forum, but we've got due diligence throughout our whole life. Just not, as Christians, we just don't sit in here and are Christians. This is the last place that one would think that I'm going to only be a Christian. We've got to take it out into the world, and taking it out into the world is everything that we do. Any comments right now? Ted? Not to interrupt you, Bill's took place about 445, I believe, BC, and this is taken at about 600 BC. So there's...
When they were in Babylonian captivity, or Bill's was when they had to return. The second thing, if I can remember, the thing was one. No, I heard this.
Yes.
don't follow me, and this is your doom. That's like 900 years before Daniel. That's a long time. And like you just said, with a couple of kings, there were a lot of bad kings. God gave them a long time to prove themselves, so that when this calamity happened, they've been given a lot of chances.
Yes, absolutely. It's not I call it a knee-jerk reaction where something happens and a decision or an action is made. God has given them years.
You gotta face in God.
Thankfully, we do. Anything else, Ted? I'm going to make you wait. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was thinking when you were talking about God being a just God, you know, there's so many people that said, what kind of God would destroy his people? But he gave them all the warnings. He said, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. And what, you know, if we have people that are wrongdoers in our society, we go, we need to get justice. They need to be punished. And yet those people broke God's law, but people don't want them to be punished by God because they broke God's law. God is a just God, and he would not be a just God if he didn't punish those people for not doing what he told them to do.
Exactly.
Because that was his promise. He said, if you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. So to be just, he has to have that stuff happen to him.
Absolutely. And it gives us a confidence when he says he's going to do something, we believe it in the scriptures. We know he's going to do what he says because he's proven it chapter and chapter and verse again throughout the entire Bible. He says he's going to do something. It might not be on our time frame, but he does it. It might not have been on the Israelites' time frame, but he did it. They might be thinking, he's not going to take this land away from us. He says it was ours. But he said if you didn't do these things, he's going to take it away from you. He took it away from them. Terry?
It was never a perpetual promise. It was a conditional promise. That conditional thing of, stay faithful isn't said every time. There were some verses he said, I'm giving you this land forever. But then later on you find that forever doesn't mean forever. It means as long as you're faithful. Now, we had Saul, David, Solomon, which were the first three kings. After that, they broke into the northern kingdom, which they called Israel, the southern kingdom they called Judah. If we remember back when we were kids in Sunday school class, we'd have a list of the northern kings and if they were good and bad. And every single one of them were bad. Just and in the text it says, and he was worse than the other guy, but every one of them was bad. And so God sent prophets to them, but they didn't change. They went that direction, and the kings led them that direction. And so the northern kingdom was taken into Assyrian captivity, and it was a couple hundred years later that the southern kingdom was taken into Babylonian. Well, why didn't they both go into captivity? Because some of the kings and the people were faithful in the southern kingdom, and Judah lasted longer. But as time went on, the good kings and the people following God were fewer. Until finally, the later prophets were saying, look, we're coming to the end of the road here, folks. If you don't straighten up real soon, you're going to be gone. And they didn't straighten up. And it wasn't 100%. It was never 100% in the north bad. It was never 100% in the south bad. But it was the overwhelming culture. And so here in Daniel, we have some good people that are being taken to captivity along with the bad. That's part of what we're going to find in Daniel here, is that there were good folks that were over there that hadn't done anything against God, and their children hadn't done anything against God. But God's punishment can sometimes come slow, but it will come.
I don't want to say it's a broad brush, but it takes a big path and it gets the majority of the people that are doing wrong and it punishes them. But if there's the good people in Judea and that are caught in it, they're going to be in captivity with them as well. Tom?
I was just going to say, to repeat Jack and everything you said, when you read out of Jeremiah, if you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, those are long books, and all of them have been God's plea to call people back. And Jeremiah's theme, as I recall, was basically, I've been calling and calling and calling, and you've refused to repent. And so now judgment is at hand. So
Absolutely.
Nonetheless, because God is patient doesn't mean that God is any less interested or, to Bill's point about justice, justice will still be served, it's just God's patient right now.
He's very, and he's patient with us right now. I mean, he's calling and calling all us to come to him. At some point, he's going to stop calling, and Jesus is going to come back, and it's over. It's done. Ted?
Okay, everybody here is provoking me to say more. Nobody said anything wrong, but sometimes I like to look, as you guys know, in broad strokes. Okay? Why was and I'm not talking about any specific king or anything, why was the northern kingdom destroyed first, and how was it destroyed? Well, it was destroyed first. One of the reasons is because what Harry said, none of their kings were any good. Okay? So, there was a reason why. Now, what happened to them wasn't just that they were carried away with the Assyrians, like the southern ones with Babylonian. They were intermingled. They actually had Assyrians come, and what it did was destroy their heritage so that they could not they could not trace their lineage anymore, even during Old Testament time. Okay? The southern kingdom could do that. So why did it take longer for the Babylonian kingdom to take the southern kingdom? Maybe it was because the kings were better. I think that's part of it. But I think there's a more important reason. Anybody guess what it is? To keep the lineage pure. Go ahead. Okay? Because the Messiah was going to come from the southern kingdom. It was going to come from Judah. That was important. It could not be destroyed until the Messiah had come. Now, what happened in 70 AD that Nathan, I'm trying to kind of take all these different books and put them together. What happens in 70 AD, what Nathan has been talking about on Wednesday night, is that those records finally, after the Messiah came, were destroyed to the point where now no one in the Jewish nation can trace their ancestry back to Old Testament times to figure out who would be the priests, etc. So he was very patient and methodical on how he did this to make sure the Messiah came. And then in the long run, first to the northern kingdom and finally to the southern kingdom in 70 AD, he destroyed it all so that it can't be unscrambled again.
That's, yeah, absolutely. You can't add to that. I mean, it just makes it so much more than,
We got to have a plan that we don't even understand sometimes.
did you say or still?
Yeah,
That's-
his ways are not our ways. He's still got a plan, we still don't know it,
Correct.
We know a lot more of it now, but there's a lot more in the future coming, and we just.
It's not for us to understand it, it's for us to follow. So that makes it so much easier. And thank you for the points on the northern and southern kingdom. And I had one note about the northern, but I don't have to make it now.
One more extra comment, less, forgive me.
As many as you want.
Agreeing with everything that everybody said here. Another factor is that in the Old Testament, God didn't say, if you disobey me, I'm going to have you burn in hell. He says, I'm going to punish you here on earth. The New Testament is not a physical kingdom. They were a real physical kingdom back then. And he could punish them as a real physical kingdom. We are in a spiritual kingdom now. We're not in the same kind of situation in the New Covenant as they were in the Old Covenant. So here, the New Testament doesn't talk so much about us going into physical captivity in another country because we have sinned here. It talks about judgment at the end of time. But that's a very different thing than the Old Testament time of punishment. And so God did do physical punishment upon the Jews. But as Ted said, it wasn't to destroy them completely. It was to keep a remnant, it was to keep the lineage pure, so that his promises would come true. And his promises ran for thousands of years, but they were going to come true. There was no way it was not going to happen the way that God had said it was going to happen. And he was going to change history if necessary to make sure that it happened the way that he promised happening or that happening. It was gonna happen.
Well, nobody could stop that.
But it's different with our kingdom. We're waiting for Christ to come back and take us into the kingdom into the heavens. There's no real promise about us having physical punishment here on earth.
And it wasn't just that he was going to come, that's important. He was going to come, the way God said he was going to come, even if he had to do a whole lot of extra weeding.
I mean, and it's spelled out how he's going to come in the Old Testament. And that's with what Terry said, and Ted and Bill and Tom. It's in Ted just used the word weaving. He weaved his way through, and Jesus came the way that is spelled out in the Old Testament. And as Terry said, it was going to happen, and nobody can stop God, and we know the results of what happened through the lineage being preserved in that.
When you look at the Old Testament in these ways, how can you not believe it was written by a God that got that Messiah here? It's impossible it was written by men.
Men couldn't have gotten all these stories and accounts in line like this that are interweaved so well, and the result coming out what it is. Great comments, guys. Anything else? We might get to verse 2 today. Anything else before we continue on? Hey, I love the talk. When you participate, it makes me feel good that you're thinking and listening, and the comments are very helpful for me, and I really appreciate that. And well, somebody else can stand up here. Continuing on, we see, okay, we just got into verse 1, that Daniel, Judea is been taken captive, and the temple's been destroyed. God's people are carried away into captivity. And back in those days, you would think when a nation is taken into captivity, whether it was God's people or any other nation, the nation that's taken them into captivity and the ones around them saying, look at these people. Their gods can't save them. They can't protect them. They can't deliver them. The same is going to be said of God's people. That look, they boast about how powerful and strong their God is, but they're captives now. So that is going to be said about the people of Judah, that their God is not powerful. He can't deliver them. Look, Nebuchadnezzar came in and he took them. They're now under his control. And so it's like their God is powerless. The God of everything, the God of creation, has become powerless, that he can't deliver his people. That could be the mindset of other nations and of Nebuchadnezzar. But we know that God uses people for different reasons in different ways. And in Jeremiah chapter 25, starting with verse 9. I know, I'm bouncing all around and I've not hit Daniel yet. Jeremiah 25, verse 9. I will summon all the people of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares the Lord. And I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn and everlasting ruin. God uses other nations to teach his people a lesson. And that's one thing God's doing here in the book of Daniel. I just wanted to point out that the phrase there, my servant Nebuchadnezzar, that just goes to show Nebuchadnezzar didn't do it on his own. God had his hand in it. God had his hand on his people being taken into captivity. Finally, the book of Daniel. Verses, let's go 1 through 3 or 1 through 4. In the 3rd year reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. And the king ordered Aspenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal families and nobles, youths in whom there was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, who had the ability for serving in the king's court, and he ordered him to teach them literature in the language of the Chaldeans. Why do you think that Nebuchadnezzar only had him take some of the vessels? He only took the best. He only wanted the best. The things that he didn't think was as good as what he had, he left behind. Some people say that he left, some commentators say that he left some of the other vessels there so that the people could continue some of their religious acts there. So that's why he didn't take them all. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if a king would do that, allow his captives to have vessels and like that to worship. But he took the best. He took the best of the items, and he took the best of the people. In verse, where was it? Verse 4, he's saying, and the youth whom there was no defect. So he's taking the best of the young people. Why on earth would he want captives, the best of these young people, to be around?
He wanted smart people in his court.
Absolutely.
He wanted people that he could work with and learn from.
That already had some knowledge, some understanding.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The empire had 50 different nationalities. The empire that Babylon controlled. There were lots of different peoples. And the smart king doesn't ignore people. He'll have people from the various groups be around him so that he can hear from them and then have good policies. That's a smart king. And he wanted smart people around him.
Absolutely. And regarding that, how the people that he took, the young men that he took, we go back to Isaiah chapter 39, verses 6 and 7. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all that your fathers laid up in store this day shall be carried to Babylon, nothing shall be left. And some of your sons who shall issue from you, whom you shall beget, shall be taken away, and shall become the officials in the palace of the king of Babylon. So it's foretold that some of your kids are going to be taken away and become property of the king. And he wanted the best. He wanted the best and the brightest. And back in that day, it was also believed that the people that God takes, that the gods of that day take, not the one true God, the best, the brightest, the best looking are better than all the others. So physical appearance, physical stature had an input, an impact on how they felt that people were back in the day. And that's one reason he took some of the best looking, some of the brightest to have in his court, that it's better to go along. So he's taken the best and the brightest to build up his court. And it says in chapter 1 that he's taken people from the royal family. So he's just not taking the kids off the street. He's taken it from the nobles. He's taken the educated people. He's taken the ones that have some knowledge of government, some knowledge of laws, literature, and things that are going on from where they're from, and he's going to take it and use it to his advantage to put them in his own personal court. The well-educated. And then going on in verse 5. And the king appointed for them.
I think it's interesting, and this is, I don't know if this is in every translation, but in ESV, when it's talking about those young people, it uses the words, it's translated earlier, it's youths without blemish. He had the same standards as God did for sacrifice. Nebuchadnezzar did, and I think that might be the same terminology used in Genesis about, a lamb without blemish. I don't know if there's a connection there, but
Could very well be.
parallel at least.
He was wanting the best and brightest, so why not? I mean, why wouldn't he want something to that effect in carrying it across?
Yeah, he says without any physical defect.
New American says defect, no defect. So no defect, no blemish. I mean, right going up to the next to the word pure. So Verse 5, and the king appointed to them a daily ration from the king's choice food, from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated for 3 years, and at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. So, these men that were taken captive, and there's more than just God's people there, because Nebuchadnezzar captured other nations as well, so there's a large number of people coming in, along with God's people, and so Nebuchadnezzar took the best of the best, and now these people went from being a captor, slave, getting nothing to eat, possibly getting beaten, possibly having hard labor, to being pulled aside, being educated, being taught for 3 years, getting the king's choice food and wine. You're not going to starve. You're not going to go hungry at all. You're going to be treated well. You're going to be taught well. You're going to be educated. You're going to be taken care of. So their life is completely changed from the rest of those that have been taken in captivity. And Daniel and his friends are part of this. Read in verse 6. Now among them were the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. So, why do you think he had changed their names? Change to the Babylonian names. Indoctrinate them into the Babylonian culture. And one way to do that, get rid of your old name, forget your old life, forget your old culture, forget your old religion. This is who you are now. And not unlike when slaves were in South America and came over here, they gave them new names to get them out of who you were. This is who you are now. And names back then used to have meaning. I don't know if names for people today have meaning. My name means I was named after my grandfather and I named after my father. That's what my name means to me. I don't know if Clifford means anything else. It just means I was named after my grandfather. But back in the day, Daniel's name meant God is my judge. His new name, Belshazzar, means to protect. He's going to be in the king's court. And we know some of the stories that go on that Daniel has to interpret some visions in that. It kind of fits along with that. Hananiah was Yahweh has shown grace, who is now Shadrach, means inspired by Aku, and Aku is the Babylonian god of the moon. So his new name means he's inspired by the god of the moon, whereas before it was Yahweh has shown grace. Mishael, who is now Meshach, Mishael is who is or what is God, and his new name, Meshach, is belonging to Aku, belonging to the god of the moon. And Azariah, which is Abednego, his old name was Yahweh has helped, and his new name is servant of Nego, God of wisdom. It's amazing how their original names meant one thing, all pertaining to the one true God, and their new names are to all different type of pagan gods. So again, name change, indoctrinate them into the new culture, to the Babylonian culture of what they're going to be raised up in, so those men can serve in the king's court. Any comments? Yeah. Don't sound thrilled, Terry. You've got 3 minutes.
This will be shorter than that. We all remember the name Daniel. Who on earth remembers the name Belteshazzar? You know, that doesn't roll off the tongue very well.
Nope.
But on the other three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that rolls right off your tongue.
Yep.
And yet, to get from the silly into the more serious, in the very next verse, the writer of this book is not going to call him Belteshazzar.
No.
He's going to be called
Daniel.
Daniel. Because he's writing it for Jews. He's writing it for the people that were still believing in God. And so, we don't find him called Belteshazzar later on in the book.
It's always Daniel.
That's the name, the other name, but that's not how Daniel thought of himself. He thought of him as Daniel.
Yes.
Even though he had this other official name
They were short and sweet.
And it's interesting that whenever we talk about it, we talk about Daniel, his real name, and the Babylonian names with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whenever we tell the story,
Yes.
is there a reason for that? We can pronounce it for that.
It could be we pronounce it. Because if you go through the book of Daniel, it's not that way, like Terry said.
Okay.
It's Daniel and their new name. I'm sorry, their old name. I don't know why. I was looking down to verse 17. It's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I mean,
Yeah, goes up.
yeah. And through, Ted was nice to direct me in several commentators. And each one of them had no reason why it's done that way. Why it's Daniel and why it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nobody had a solid footing. They believe, that nobody come out and said it's easier to say. It's just that's how it was done. There's no rhyme or reason to why the names are laid out that way.
Hey, Cliff, I got a question. In the second verse, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar. He took objects from the temple of God
Right.
back to his temple. What God did he serve?
He served many gods, not just one god. I'll get a list of the names for you. But as we see here, when he renamed them, there was the Aku, which was the god of the moon, Nego, which was the god of wisdom. So those are two right there as he renamed three of the young men there. Anything else before we're dismissed for today? Rest of chapter 1 or part of chapter 1 next week. Thank you all very much.